I personally will not be talking about any revelations that come about solely as a result of WikiLeaks. Our intelligence officials, who are not partisan people, have told us this is the work of a foreign intelligence agency. And we cannot be a country where foreign intelligence agencies can interfere or influence our political process. What I would say to my Republican colleagues, some of whom may be disappointed by the position I've taken, is today it's them, tomorrow it could be us. And just think about this. Do we really want to be a country where foreign leaders or foreign intelligence agencies can blackmail our elected officials and say to them that unless you do what we want you to do, we're going to release emails from your campaign manager, your wife, your daughter, your son, and we're going to embarrass you. So unless you want to be embarrassed, you better do what we want you to do. Is that what we want? Because I'll tell you, that's what Vladimir Putin does.
So I want to talk about how I think of the Russian attack in the 2016 election, which probably spanned from around 2014 until maybe 2019. Because I think it's important background to understand how that played a key role in polarizing an already polarized community in the United States.
No Obama! No Obama!
No more Obama!
In other words, taking what was a strong split between Republicans and Democrats and making it largely unbridgeable.
Invade the Capitol building. Take the Capitol.
Most people think of the Russian attack in the way in which Robert Mueller presented it, which is that there were three strands. Two of those strands were Russian attempts to interfere, Russian attempts to play in the American election. One was the social media campaign that was orchestrated by Yevgeny Prigozhin, who was a close Vladimir Putin associate, often called Putin's chef, whom Putin has since executed in his plane as he was going to a meeting from him.
The former convict had a meteoric rise from Kremlin chef to warlord, spreading Russia's influence in Syria and Africa. As a close Putin confidant, he appeared untouchable, even laughing about his inevitable death. We'll all go to hell, but in hell we'll be the best, he joked.
It was a bunch of social media activity, both paid and unpaid, on Twitter, on Facebook.
If you can think of a social media platform, there's a strong chance the Russians used it to try to influence the 2016 US presidential election. From YouTube, Facebook and Twitter to Reddit and Instagram and more. Two reports commissioned by the US Senate Intelligence Committee says Russia's Internet Research Agency, or IRA, tried to capitalize on divisions in US politics. It pushed more than 10 million tweets, more than 1,000 YouTube videos, and around 116,000 Instagram posts. Altogether, that translated into a potential of reaching more than 140 million people.
And it also included a real-life aspect.
On March 7, 2015, the FSB officer provided Berlinova with a list of individuals associated with U.S. universities and foreign policy institutes. The FSB officer instructed Berlinova to study the publications and activities of the people on his list, so that he and Berlinova could discuss the possibility of Berlinova reaching out to them.
So in other words, that social media campaign ended up recruiting random people in the United States. It also ended up interacting with the Trump campaign.
Quote, the Russian government engaged in an aggressive, multifaceted effort to influence or attempt to influence the outcome of the 2016 presidential election.
Beyond that, the report really goes into detail about all of these relationships between Trump campaign officials, members of the Trump inner circle, and Russians.
Then there's the hack and leak. In March of 2016, Russian hackers stole John Podesta's emails. In April and May of 2016, Russian hackers hacked the DNC and the DCCC. They hacked all of these Democratic servers. And then starting in June of 2016, we started seeing some of that be released publicly. Some of it was released by a persona named Guccifer 2.0 that was set up at the last minute.
And he claimed not to be affiliated with Russia. He was very careful whenever he went on the internet to hide his real identity using a public VPN service to hide his IP address. But apparently, he didn't always do that. When he went online without first enabling that VPN, And the IP address researchers saw went right back to a building in Moscow as the headquarters of the GRU.
A lot of that was released around starting with the Democratic Convention.
Debbie Wasserman Schultz says that she is stepping down as Democratic Party chairwoman at the end of this week's convention. Now, this follows publication of hacked emails suggesting the DNC favored Clinton over Bernie Sanders.
And then later in October of 2016, that was released by
WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks. I love WikiLeaks. These WikiLeaks as confirmed just today by WikiLeaks. It's been amazing what's coming out on WikiLeaks. They want to distract us from WikiLeaks. Boy, that WikiLeaks has done a job on her, hasn't it?
And those are the overt aspects of Russia playing in the election. Social media campaign, hack and leak campaign. That happens against a background of attempted cultivation of Republicans, but not just Republicans.
I wanted to ask you about that famous photo of former Trump National Security Advisor Michael Flynn and the Russian President Vladimir Putin together in 2015 at a dinner in Moscow. You also, Jill Stein, were at that dinner, and you were actually in that photograph at that head table. What were you doing there?
That's a third of what Robert Mueller looked at in the first volume of his report. You have things like what happened with George Papadopoulos when Joseph Mifsud learned that he had a role on the Trump campaign and then boasted to him that the Russians had Hillary's emails and planned to interfere in the election later on.
The picture of this gentleman, this is Joseph Mifsud. This is the guy you met.
I can't. Yes. So I meet Joseph Mifsud in Rome after I'm introduced to him at this university by the Italian foreign minister. So you could understand, before even my name is public in the Washington Post, I'm being basically chaperoned in Rome by the Italian foreign minister to meet this individual, Joseph Mifsud. As you correctly stated, at a later meeting in London, he decides to drop this information unsolicited in my lap over brunch at a five-star hotel in London that the Russians have Hillary Clinton's emails and et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, so
I never asked for this information.
You have descriptions of the June 9th meeting when Don Jr. accepted an offer of campaign dirt from close family associates, the Agalarovs, and had this meeting on June 9th, 2016 in Trump Tower where the Agalarovs pitched basically ending sanction relief in exchange for campaign dirt.
Our investigation has uncovered new information that suggests the Russian lawyer at the Trump Tower meeting, the meeting where Trump campaign officials thought they'd be getting dirt on Hillary Clinton, was far more connected to the Russian government than she'd acknowledged before. The issues she was concerned about were American sanctions, which she says are based on lies and false reporting. She wanted them lifted. Which brings us to the bigger question. How deep are Veselnitskaya's ties with the Russian state? For starters, court documents show she was doing legal work for Russia's intelligence agency, the FSB.
So to be clear, you were working for a military unit that has ties to the FSB.
Я не могу более сказать вам ничего.
Nothing much came of the meeting, but nevertheless, that pitch was there, where Russians waltzed into Trump Tower, said, sanctions relief. Don Jr. said, maybe we'll consider it after we win. And then Agalarov said, okay, we're going to help you. The next week, by the way, Agalarov sent Trump a painting for his birthday. And that came out the same day that the first stolen emails were released. There's the Moscow Trump Tower deal, where starting in 2015, Michael Cohen is working with Felix Sater, pursuing the largest tower in Moscow, which is something that Russia knew Trump wanted going back to 2013. And there were actually like two other pitches to Trump to build this massive tower.
CNN has also confirmed the BuzzFeed scoop that there was talk of gifting Russian President Vladimir Putin with the $50 million penthouse apartment in the proposed luxury building.
And the Felix Sater one is important for a couple of reasons.
Felix Sater. He's a guy with a colorful past, which included spending a year in prison for slashing a man's face in a bar fight and a stock fraud conviction involving a mafia-linked brokerage firm. Sater went on to partner with Trump on a string of projects. Last year, we learned that Sater, who's an American citizen who was born in the Soviet Union, wrote an email to Trump lawyer Michael Cohen in 2015, vowing to engineer a deal to build the Trump Tower in Moscow, writing, quote, "Our boy can become president of the USA and we can engineer it."
One is that by the time the deal got packaged by Sater in January of 2016, it involved the involvement of one of two sanctioned banks, and it involved a retired GRU officer as the broker.
Did you seek to acquire funding through Russian banks for the deal?
To build a building like that in Moscow, the only banks you could go to are Russian banks.
Was one of them VTB?
Yes, it was.
So you did seek to acquire funding through VTB?
Well, there was a developer. It wasn't my deal. I put the deal together. I came to Michael Cohen, who's an old and dear friend.
Yep.
In January of 2016, Michael Cohen had already bought off on working with sanctioned banks, working with the GRU to pursue this Trump Tower. He ended up calling the Kremlin, the real Kremlin. He ended up calling Dmitry Peskov's office because Sater told him, you need to get Vladimir Putin's buy-off to get this project approved. Cohen calls Dmitry Peskov's office, tells them what he's thinking of. Peskov's assistant writes down what's going on. And from that point forward, Vladimir Putin has his first receipt, basically, his first piece of proof that Donald Trump and Michael Cohen would be willing to work with the GRU, would be willing to work with sanctioned banks to get what Trump very much wanted, this Trump Tower deal.
Mr. President, you made some comments about the American Republican presumptive nominee, Donald Trump. You called him brilliant, outstanding, talented. I was wondering what in him led you to that judgment, and do you still hold that judgment?
I only said that he was a bright person. Isn't he bright? He is. I did not say anything else about him. But there's one thing that I paid attention to and that I definitely welcome, is that Mr. Trump said he's ready to restore full-fledged Russian-American relations. What can there be bad about it? Don't you welcome it?
There's Carter Page, but Carter Page is actually only important kind of as a distraction. Carter Page was being recruited by Russians going back years. It is true that the CIA had approved talking to Carter Page about the Russians that he was meeting with. He was not an informant, which is the Republicans like to mislead about that. But the CIA knew that that Russians were trying to cultivate him, so they permitted people at the CIA, people at the FBI to talk to Carter Page about it.
This was in the summer of
July 2016.
Okay.
Yes.
So was that after you had been to Russia or before? Because you had also been to a similar to make a speech at a university there. Exactly. So it was the week after you'd been to Russia.
Yep.
Okay. And was there anything unusual about your conversations with this guy?
I never found anything unusual whatsoever. And there's a lot of allegations out there right now.
A couple of the people trying to recruit Carter Page were prosecuted in 2015, and when the FBI was preparing for trial on that, Carter Page basically told the FBI, "Oh yeah, I went to Russia and told them that I didn't narc them out." In other words, Carter Page told the FBI before he was even involved in the Trump campaign that he went to Russia and tried to reassure him that he still remained friendly to them.
The spying they did on the Trump campaign. I'm shocked to hear that they put a spy in the campaign. FBI spies, or maybe two spies.
If they ran a spy ring, that is an absolute red line.
Now, from one spy to two spies to a spy ring, that's Devin Nunes, of course, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, who presumably should be familiar with real spy rings as well as how real counterintelligence investigations work. And just to refresh everyone's memory, the way they work is the way things apparently played out with Mr. Page, George Papadopoulos, Sam Clovis, and perhaps others. According to our own reporting and others, this confidential source was not someone embedded in the campaign to spy on it. He was asked to try and glean information from several persons. This was happening in the middle of an operation the U.S. intelligence community would warn the Trump campaign about in the summer of 2016, according to NBC News, and later conclude, reading from their report, we assess Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered an influence campaign in 2016 aimed at the U.S. presidential election. Russia's goals were to undermine public faith in the U.S. democratic process, denigrate Secretary Clinton, and harm her electability and potential presidency.
There's Mike Flynn. Mike Flynn, of course, was paid by two Russian entities. The big one that we always hear about is that RT Gala in December of 2016. Mike Flynn also had pretty close ties to the head of the GRU, who was killed in early 2016. But that, I think, made the Russians believe that he was open to working with Russia. And in fact, over and over again, he said that he wanted to work with Russia on counterterrorism issues. Russia kept reaching out to Mike Flynn, and as we know, in the transition, Mike Flynn kept calling the Russian ambassador Sergei Kislyak to undermine Obama's foreign policy.
He maintained the fact that he never talked to the Russian ambassador about sanctions, but still something wasn't adding up. And eventually, we determined that he did, in fact, talk about the sanctions, even though we didn't believe that it was illegal. The fact was it turned more or less into a conversation about whether or not he was being honest with us and the vice president, and the president asked for his resignation, and we got it.
There was Paul Manafort, and we'll come back to Paul Manafort, but the important thing about Paul Manafort is that he had been working for Russian-backed oligarchs for years in Ukraine, had gotten enormously wealthy off of it, and then in 2014, after Viktor Yanukovych was ousted from Ukraine, those money bags dried up.
The revolution was over, but the reckoning had just begun.
There was a fire in headquarters of Party of Region. During this fire, some people died, and somebody came inside the office and took this documentation. A payment for political consulting from Yanukovych to Manafort, according to Black Ledger.
The documents came to be known as the Black Ledger, appearing to show under-the-table payments made by the Yanukovych government between 2007 and 2012. Among the 20,000 line items were $12.7 million in alleged payouts to Manafort.
And so Paul Manafort uses working for free for the Trump campaign in 2016 as a way to try and restore that moneybags way of life that he had up until 2014. And importantly, he was from the start saying, here's what I'm doing in the campaign. He was giving them inside views of the campaign. And as we'll get to, there's this famous August 2nd, 2016 meeting where he meets with his long-term business associate, Konstantin Kilimnik. And the scope of that meeting has the outlines of a quid pro quo. Paul Manafort says he didn't buy on that quid pro quo. He didn't enter into that quid pro quo, but it continued on after that August 2nd, 2016 meeting, and it laid out what a lot of these other attempts to cultivate did as well, which is Russia wanted to get people to agree to end sanctions in exchange for campaign help, in exchange for financial help.
We further assess Putin and the Russian government developed a clear preference for President-elect Trump. We have high confidence in these judgments.
That was always the equation. It's important to remember, though, this kind of cultivation goes on all the time. And it wasn't limited to Trump's people. That same RT gala that I just mentioned, which Mike Flynn attended in December of 2015, was also attended by Jill Stein, right? So the Green Party candidate for the presidency in 2016. And of course, the Jill Stein vote in Michigan arguably made a significant difference in losing the state for Hillary. In addition, there were two people, Max Blumenthal, Sydney's kid, and he has since adopted the Russian line in Syria and on a bunch of other things, including on Russian attribution for the hack and leak.
Can you ever be held accountable for the lies you told Americans for years and years and years? You lied to Americans for years. Let's go. Silence is violence.
And then Ray McGovern, who was a member of what's called VEEPs. These are a bunch of former intelligence professionals who opposed the Iraq War. And he fell hook, line, and sinker for Russian propaganda about the hack and leak campaign and really recruited some other people, including former NSA people, to buy off on this alternate explanation for the hack and leak campaign.
Ray McGovern, before we went to break, I was asking you about the motive behind why the allegations are coming that Trump is Vladimir Putin's puppet. But I also want to talk about the way the CIA and the NSA are responding to the report, to the allegations by you. Talk about that, because you were a former CIA analyst.
I was, and it has some really interesting case studies to adduce here to show that this is, well, in the Bronx we would call it a crock. Now, Bill Binney, who used to be technical director for NSA, has said from a technical point of view, since NSA intercepts and knows the originator and the recipient of each and every email, I know it boggles the mind, but that's what the case is, and that since Ed Snowden gave us slides showing us exactly how NSA accomplishes this with trace mechanisms here and there, that it's virtually impossible that this could have been hacked by Russians and given to Julian Assange without NSA knowing it.
The reason I raise that is it's important. Had the hack and leak campaign and the social media campaign not happened, had Trump not been as welcoming of this effort, had Mike Flynn not tried to undermine Obama's sanctions in December of 2016, we might have all discussed this as Russia's broader effort to cultivate American allies.
In the white working class, there are far too many wolves. Heroin, broken families, joblessness, and more often than we'd like to believe, abusive and neglectful parents. It's hardly surprising that into that vacuum has stepped Donald J. Trump. For many, he is the only thing left that offers camaraderie, community, and a sense of purpose. Wow. Joining us now, former Marine, Yale Law School graduate, and author, J.D.
Welcome to the show. It sounds like you think that's a false sense of purpose.
I do think it's a false sense of purpose, and I think that what's happened is where in these communities where everything has kind of fallen apart, folks aren't going to church, their kids are addicted to drugs, they don't have a whole lot left, and Donald Trump is one of the few things that they do have. It's unfortunate in a lot of ways because I think in many ways what Trump is just another opioid.
And this isn't always cultivating as an intelligence recruit. It's cultivating people who will be at least more willing to listen to Russia's side.
We also have with us the Republican senator from Ohio, close ally of Donald Trump, Senator J.D. Vance, Republican of Ohio. He just put the Ukraine issue on the fore, and what is your response?
Well, first, Jake, the idea that Putin loves Donald Trump or Donald Trump loves Putin is absolutely absurd. The reason that we're in this position, Jake, is because we're stretched way too thin. Let's take just one of those weapon systems that we're talking about, 155 millimeter artillery shells. The Russians currently have a 5-to-1 advantage over the Ukrainians. The Israelis will need this stuff. The Taiwanese need this stuff. And of course, America needs this stuff. So what we should be doing is with Ukraine, encouraging them to take a defensive posture, not these disastrous counteroffensive the Biden administration has been promoting.
The counteroffensive is within Ukraine. They're not seeking land from Russia. And in fact, just today...
I'm not passing judgment on the morality of what they're doing. Of course, it's their territory, Jake, but you have to acknowledge military reality on the ground. We've got to choose the strategy that might actually work.
But the counteroffensive is within Ukrainian territory.
And maybe over time will become a full-blown asset, but just people who are willing to listen to Russia's pitch and importantly, may end up being cornered by something Russia does. So let's go back to the Trump Tower meeting to talk about how that happens. In January 2016, as I said, Michael Cohen calls up the Kremlin, says we want to go into business, explains that he's willing to work with GRU, he's willing to work with sanctioned banks. On May 4th of 2016, so after Trump finalizes his role as the candidate, Felix Sater calls Michael Cohen back up and says, hey, everything's going, get on a plane, come to St. Petersburg, come meet with possibly even Putin.
Here's the one that I think is interesting in the New York Times characterizing emails. They said Mr. Sater said he was eager to show video clips to his Russian contacts of instances of Mr. Trump speaking glowingly about Russia and said he would arrange for Mr. Putin to praise Mr. Trump's business acumen. If he says it, we own this election, Mr. Sater wrote. You wrote that.
Yes, I did write that, yes.
Why in these emails, there's two of them here,
right.
Why are you guys making this connection between building this building in Russia and his electoral success?
Me personally, I was trying to build the tallest building in the world or in Europe.
And Cohen was pursuing that. Cohen was getting travel tickets, and he was ready to go to St. Petersburg to pursue this Trump Tower deal. And then on the same day that it was made public.
But first, the Democratic National Committee said today Russian government hackers have penetrated its computer network. Breaches allowed hackers to access emails, internal chats, and opposition research Democrats have compiled on presumptive Republican nominee Donald Trump.
Again, things would have been very different if the Democrats had not attributed the Russian hack and leak on June 14, 2016 in real time. Democrats do that. Washington Post comes out with a story. Democrats have been hacked. GRU is behind it. And that day, Cohen backs out of the trip to St. Petersburg. But already at that point, Cohen knows, Trump knows, that Cohen has made this agreement to work with a sanctioned bank and work with the GRU to pursue this Trump Tower deal. That looks stupid and rash in January 2016, when probably Cohen and Trump didn't think they had any chance of winning election. But in June of 2016 and July of 2016, that looks catastrophic.
I have nothing to do with Russia. I don't have any jobs in Russia. I'm all over the world, but we're not involved in Russia. I have nothing to do with Russia. Nothing to do. I never met Putin. Nothing to do with Russia whatsoever.
Right? All of a sudden, through no willful act of Cohen and Trump, they look like they're colluding with Russia. Cohen and Trump had, as far as we know, they had no knowledge of the hack and leak. The hack and leak campaign hadn't even happened yet in January of 2016. They had no knowledge of that in January 2016 when Michael Cohen got on the phone and said, sure, I'll work with the sanctioned bank. Sure, I'll work with the GRU. But having agreed to that in January of 2016 became far more costly in June, in July of 2016. And that's what I mean by holding them by the balls. What Russia did for a number of people was get them to compromise themselves such that when the full scope of the hack and leak campaign and the social media campaign became clear later in the year, they were stuck. And this brings you to that famous July 27th, 2016 press conference.
So it's been 235 days since crooked Hillary Clinton has had a press conference.
So this is a week after WikiLeaks has released the DNC emails that were stolen by Russia. And Paul Manafort is beginning to get pressure about his background with Russia. People are beginning to focus more closely on Trump's background with Russia. People already know that Carter Page had gone to Russia in early July of 2016 and said some very pro-Russian things.
Flew over to Moscow to participate in the 10th anniversary
Russian
celebration of RT, Russian television, a propaganda arm of the Russian government, and you sat next to Vladimir Putin at a celebratory dinner. Were you paid for that event?
You'd have to ask the folks that went over there to
well, I'm asking you. You'd know if you were paid.
Yeah, I mean, I went over there as a speaking event. It was a speaking event.
And
so what difference does that make?
Well, I mean,
somebody go, oh, he's paid by the Russians.
Well, Donald Trump has made a lot of the fact that Hillary Clinton has taken money from Wall Street.
Yeah, I didn't take any money from Russia, if that's what you're asking me.
Well, then who paid you?
My speakers bureau. Ask them.
Okay.
So in late July of 2016, everyone is beginning to focus on WTF. What is Trump's real relationship with Russia? And at a press conference in Florida, Trump said three things that were very damning. The most famous of which, he said,
Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing.
This was a reference to Hillary Clinton's private server. She had, remember, given 30,000 back to the State Department and deleted 30,000 that she deemed private. Trump says, Russia, if you're listening, if you have those 30,000 deleted emails,
I think you will probably be rewarded mightily by our press.
Russia, if you're listening, that's the famous part. But in the same press conference, Trump said two more things. One, he said that he would consider recognizing Russia's annexation of Crimea. Small comment right at the end.
We'll be looking at that. Yeah, we'll be looking.
But it was a really dramatic shift from U.S. policy at that point. He was willing to recognize Russia's annexation of Crimea, or at least consider it, he said. And then the third, and this is the important one, He says, I've got no business interest with Russia.
We were doing Miss Universe 4 or 5 years ago in Russia. It was a tremendous success, very, very successful. And there were developers in Russia that wanted to put a lot of money into developments in Russia, and they wanted us to do it, but it never worked out. Frankly, I didn't want to do it for a couple of different reasons.
I've already closed out those business deals. That was a lie. That was a lie, because at that point, the Trump Tower Moscow deal, the Cohen deal, was still alive. And in fact, Cohen and Trump, or at least Cohen claims that he and Trump had conversations about this as late as July, possibly even until November. And as soon as Trump tells that lie publicly, as soon as Trump stands in front of the American people and says, I have no ongoing business interest with Vladimir Putin, Dmitry Peskov pockets this receipt and knows he has Trump by the balls. It's not just this incredibly damning conversation that Michael Cohen made in January 2016. It's now that Cohen and Trump are lying about it publicly. And so at that point, Russia knows that Trump has made a decision to hide what he did before, and that Russia will have that over Trump from that point forward. Two other parts of this that are really important. Roger Stone, the rat fucker, goes back to Nixon, but he's also a long-term associate of Paul Manafort. And curiously, when Mueller investigated this, he separated the Manafort investigation under Andrew Weissman from the Roger Stone investigation under Jeannie Rhee. And I'm not sure how smart that was, but one of the things Roger Stone did was help with Tom Barrack, help get Paul Manafort installed as Trump's free campaign manager. From very early on, starting no later than May, Roger Stone was telling the campaign that he had access to dirt. He had access to dirt on Hillary Clinton. And if you can believe Rick Gates, at first they were all like, yeah, sure, Roger, whatever. They didn't believe him. During this period, by the way, Roger Stone was doing things like screaming at Rick Gates because Trump was making foreign policy statements, including on Russia, without running them by Roger Stone first, which is interesting because in the time period when Trump made the Russia, if you're listening comment and said, we'll consider recognizing Crimea, in the days immediately after that, Roger Stone was drafting these pro-Russian tweets for Donald Trump, which he said Trump had asked him for in a phone call, I think on July 30th, 2016. And there's some sense that Roger Stone may have, in this brief window at the end of July, early August 2016, been basically trying to script pro-Russian statements for Donald Trump. Anyway, Roger Stone keeps claiming he's got advance notice, and then while he's at the RNC convention, he calls up Manafort, he calls up Trump and says, okay, the emails are coming. So when they come days later, all of a sudden he looks like he's a genius, right? He looks like he really does have an inside track to the Russian hack and leak emails. So at that point, in July of 2016, all of a sudden Roger Stone looks super smart.
So is Trump behind, even, ahead?
No, it's impossible to say. With Trump, there is an X factor. He may still have 60 days, which in this case is a lifetime. If Donald Trump runs a conventional Republican campaign, he will lose. The only thing predictable about Donald Trump is that he's entirely unpredictable. Right. He could come at her anywhere.
Now Trump and Manafort and Rick Gates are all dealing with Roger Stone. Roger Stone, for example, pitches Paul Manafort and says, I've got a way to win. Call me. He's got conversations with Donald Trump. And it's not clear via what means. But what we know is that, and this is something that I've laid out, and that is in Paul Manafort's interviews.
Stone told Manafort that there would be a WikiLeaks drop of emails with Podesta, and that Podesta would be in the barrel, and Manafort would be vindicated. Manafort had a clear memory of the moment because of the language Stone used. It was Manafort's understanding that WikiLeaks had Podesta's emails, and they were going to show that Manafort would be vindicated because he had to leave the campaign for being too pro-Russian. And this would show that Podesta also had links to Russia and would have to leave.
Is in Rick Gates' interviews, is in Ted Malloch's interviews. Everyone believes that Roger Stone has gotten in the first 2 weeks of August 2016. Roger Stone gets not just advance notice of the next drop, which is going to be John Podesta, but that he gets advanced look at it. That he gets a look at documents that basically piggyback off of a hit job that Steve Bannon has been working on for months. So in other words, at that point, early August 2016, Roger Stone is going to go pursue, he's going to go take out John Podesta in the same way that Paul Manafort was being taken out for his pro-Russian ties in Ukraine. And he does something to get an advanced look at a few documents from the John Podesta collection.
Former Deputy Campaign Chair Rick Gates testified he was riding with Trump to New York's LaGuardia Airport that summer when Trump took a phone call from Stone, where the pair apparently discussed WikiLeaks' plans to release Democratic emails, which were hacked and stolen by Russians. After Mr. Trump got off the phone with Mr. Stone, what did Mr. Trump say? The prosecutor asked Gates. He indicated more information would be coming, Gates responded today at Stone's criminal trial. Gates testified that prior to WikiLeaks' first email dump, for months information had been talked about. After the July release, Gates said the campaign was in a state of happiness.
And that is pressure that by the time we get to October 2016, when the emails get released, Jerome Corsi's, we got the release done just in time for the Access Hollywood video, Grab Them by the Pussy. That happens at the same time as the attribution for the hack and leak. That's what we've mostly focused on, is whether the drop on October 7th, 2016, whether that was timed to drown out the Access Hollywood.
I gotta use some Tic Tacs just in case I start kissing her. I'm automatically attracted to beautiful. I just start kissing them. It's like a magnet. Just everywhere. And when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything.
But the more important thing is that via some means in early August 2016, Roger Stone actually gets an advance peek at what's coming.
Let me ask you about some tweets in the first week of October. They go this way.
Yes.
October 2nd, Roger Stone writes, Wednesday, at Hillary Clinton is done, hashtag WikiLeaks. Let's go to October 3rd. I have total confidence that WikiLeaks and my hero Julian Assange will educate the American people soon. Hashtag lock her up. Jump 2 days later, October 5th. Libs thinking Assange will stand down are wishful thinking. Payload coming. Hashtag lock them up. Finally, Thursday, October 6th, Julian Assange will deliver a devastating expose on Hillary. At a time of his choosing, I stand by my prediction. Hashtag handcuffs for Hillary. Of course, the next day is October 7th, and then the emails come out. A fair reading of that suggests to me you had some advance warning of something big coming that had to do with John Podesta's emails.
Immediately thereafter, one of the other parts of the attack that I will talk about, called Shadow Brokers, drops.
When news of an alleged breach of the National Security Agency-backed Equation Group first surfaced, there was much speculation about whether the sale by shadow brokers of pilfered tools was real or a hoax. As it turns out, multiple security vendors are now confirming that at least some of the tools the shadow brokers are selling are real, with critical zero-day vulnerabilities now being exposed in the process.
And I've been told, and I know of additional parts, there's a shared infrastructure between the hack and leak campaign, the Goose 2.0 persona, and the shadow brokers persona. And so this is an example where as soon as Roger Stone enters into some kind of agreement to get an advanced look at what John Podesta has, all of a sudden the tie between that and an attack on the deep state, or attack on the US deep state, becomes not public, it's still not public, but becomes available to the deep state.
It's simply not every day that we get to look at tools this sophisticated. And now any script kiddie in the world has them and is using them. And ever since these dumps, digital forensics and incident responder teams have been seeing a high amount of attacks that was using stuff from these dumps. And it still continues to this day. So it's very important for us defenders to understand this, especially for the exploit called Eternal Blue. Eternal Blue would go on to be a key component for some of the world's biggest hacks. Hacks that were so big, they practically caused doomsday scenarios for many people.
Similarly, Roger Stone in this period, Roger Stone probably starting on October 3rd, 2016, so maybe this is what leads to the release of the John Podesta emails. he starts talking about a pardon for Julian Assange. We know for a fact that that he was actively discussing a pardon for Julian Assange in November, by November 15th, 2016, so just days after Trump wins the election. And these pardon discussions go on for months, right? And same kind of thing. Julian Assange releases the Podesta emails, helps Donald Trump. Roger Stone immediately starts talking about Trump, if he wins, when he wins, pardoning Julian Assange.
Why he didn't, for example, pardon Julian Assange, I can answer. Because he was misled by Mike Pompeo and others of the CIA who falsely convinced him that the WikiLeaks disclosures caused the death of American service members around the globe. It's an egregious lie. It's false, but I think that's what he was told.
And then early in 2017, we have the first glimpses of what has been called the Vault 7, Vault 8 leaks.
WikiLeaks released thousands of documents and files that it says expose hacking tools used by the Central Intelligence Agency. The leaks purportedly show that the CIA is capable of hacking smartphones, computer operating systems, automobiles, messenger applications, and even internet-connected televisions. The series of files, dubbed Vault 7, consists of 8,761 documents and files allegedly from the CIA's Center for Cyber Intelligence. Though many of the tools detailed in the documents are the kind of things you'd expect from an intelligence agency, they provide an unprecedented blueprint for how the CIA could hack individuals they're spying on.
This is a guy named Josh Schulte. He's since been convicted. He was a developer for the CIA developing hacking tools, and he got really pissy because his managers were being mean to him. And so in April of 2016, he stole the development notes and the source code for CIA's hacking tools, sent it away, probably to an intermediary who then sent it to WikiLeaks. And WikiLeaks sits on this for 8 months. WikiLeaks there's one mention when the Shadow Brokers files come out, and Julian Assange comes out and says, oh, yes, we've got files. We're basically tidying them up. We're going to release them later. But we don't hear that WikiLeaks has the CIA hacking tools until beginning in February of 2017. And again, in the early days of Trump's presidency, at a time when everyone's beginning to learn the full details of the Russian hack and leak of the Russian social media campaign.
Julian Assange, I want to get your opinion on all of the news that's breaking right now. On Monday, Google said suspected Russian agents paid for tens of thousands of dollars worth of political advertisements last year aimed at swaying the 2016 presidential election. Managers at Microsoft said Monday they too were investigating whether Russian operatives paid for inappropriate pro-Trump ads on its Bing search engine and other platforms. Social media giant Facebook has said a Russian company placed thousands of ads on their network at a cost of more than $100,000. CNN reports a number of ads specifically targeted Michigan and Wisconsin, two states crucial to Trump's victory in November. And Twitter reported last month it discovered about 200 accounts linked to a Russian campaign to influence the election. This comes as the head of the U.S. Senate Intelligence Committee said last week it's reached the conclusion that Russia did interfere in the 2016 U.S. presidential election.
All of a sudden, WikiLeaks is raising the stakes of association with WikiLeaks because they have, at a minimum, been sitting on CIA's hacking tools for 8 months, and they start releasing that, and it utterly devastates the CIA. The CIA, once they discover this in March of 2017, have to drop all of these spying efforts and try and protect basically what Josh Schulte leaked was the code for things like USB. So you recruit somebody who has a job with computers in Moscow, you give them a USB, that person sticks the USB into the computer network, and all of a sudden the CIA starts getting access to the computer network. That's the kind of tools that Josh Schulte leaked, that WikiLeaks was sitting on for 8 months. And so at a minimum, CIA all of a sudden discovers that these files have been out in the wild for 8 months, and they frantically shut everything down, try and rescue whatever assets are going to be identified because of it, and then have to rewrite all of their hacking tools. So that happens to the CIA. This Shadow Brokers character has been releasing NSA files starting in August of 2016, continuing until April of 2017, actually continuing until much later, November, December of 2017. It's not clear how long those were released. And what's important about it is these two attacks have never really three other prongs of the campaign in 2016. But what's important about it is it makes the things that Donald Trump, Roger Stone, and Don Jr. did during 2016, it raises the stakes of those. It makes those far more damaging politically. It makes Donald Trump was never going to come clean, right?
I have nothing to do with Russia. Haven't made a phone call to Russia in years. I have nothing to do with Russia. To the best of my knowledge, no person that I deal with does.
Donald Trump, from the moment he lied about having ongoing business deals with Moscow in that July 2016 meeting, Donald Trump was never going to come clean about the fact that he was hiding this ongoing business deal with Moscow. But what happened in the interim with these twin attacks, CIA, NSA, devastate the agencies at the moment they are trying to investigate all of what Russia did in 2016, is that it just raised the stakes even further on what Donald Trump could do. Donald Trump, by the way, almost blew the investigation into Josh Schulte in March of 2016. This is actually his first big classified leak. For whatever reason, somebody got it in his head to blame Obama for the compromise of CIA's files. This might have come from Mike Pompeo. That's the kind of thing he would do. But because Mike Pompeo, remember, had been cheering WikiLeaks.
National security, let's turn to first what has become a contretemps between the president, who injected the idea of Russian involvement he gave it the imprimatur of the White House after Robbie Moog, Clinton's campaign spokesman, took it up as a possible explanation for why all of the nefarious activities of the DNC had been exposed in their emails released by WikiLeaks. Adjudicate this thing for us, would you?
Lou, it's classic Clinton, right? When you find out you got a problem, you deflect, you deny, you create a contretemps where there really is none.
And somehow, nevertheless, got approved to be CIA director. So Donald Trump, in March of 2016, on the day that the FBI plans to search Josh Schulte's home in New York, he had moved to work for Bloomberg at that point, he goes to Tucker Carlson with a folder marked classified and says, I'm going to tell you about the investigation into Vault 7. And later, Tucker Carlson includes one line of this in a recorded interview he did with Donald Trump, and basically said,
and by the way, with the CIA, I just want people to know, the CIA was hacked and a lot of things taken. That was during the Obama years. That was not during us. That was during the Obama situation.
It wasn't very noticeable, but Josh Schulte would have, if he had seen that, would have recognized that they knew the hack and leak that had happened in 2016, not in 2017. Anyway, that's the day that the FBI first chose to search Josh Schulte's house. And so if Schulte had seen that in time, and it was pretty close because he had his diplomatic passport in pocket that day, had Schulte seen that in time, he would have fled the country just as Snowden did. And that's a little part of the story that we don't know. But the point is that these two twin NSA, CIA hack and leak campaigns changed the dynamics of Russia's attack on the deep state as Trump is defending himself against charges of collusion, against charges that he was helping Russia on this hack and leak campaign.
As I've said many times before, I've always said there was no collusion. Where is the collusion? You know, they're still looking for collusion. Where is the collusion? In the meantime, no collusion, no obstruction, no collusion, no obstruction. There is no collusion. You know why? Because I don't speak to Russians.
Finally, let's talk about Paul Manafort. As I said, Paul Manafort, longtime associate of Roger Stone, Tom Barack, one of Trump's biggest donors. They get him hired in March of 2016. In March of 2016, Oleg Deripaska, whom Paul Manafort worked with years ago, asks Christopher Steele to collect human intelligence on Paul Manafort so he can sue him for a bunch of money he owes him. Keep that in the background. Starting in April of 2016, Paul Manafort starts sending out notice to both his Ukrainian oligarchs and to Deripaska about what he's doing. Starting in May, he sends out campaign information. he keeps asking Konstantin Kilimnik, who said Konstantin Kilimnik worked for Manafort for years. More recently, in 2021, the intelligence community, the Treasury Department, has labeled him a Russian intelligence service, basically a Russian spy. In 2016, Kilimnik is Manafort's go-between with these Ukrainian oligarchs and also with Deripaska in Russia. And Manafort keeps asking Kilimnik, how do I get clean?
And then there's this really cryptic but interesting email that happens. It's clearly what leads to this meeting, where Kilimnik writes to Manafort in late July and says, I just met today with the man who gave you the biggest jar of black caviar you ever got. I need to come and see you to talk about this. And Paul Manafort writes back, Tuesday is best.
How do I make good with Oleg Deripaska? And that's the background to a meeting on August 2nd, 2016. In the background, this is in the same period. This is the day after, the day before, Roger Stone says, Paul Manafort, I know how we can win this campaign. Let's talk to me. This is exactly in the period where, at Trump's behest, on Trump's orders, Paul Manafort, Rick Gates are trying to push Roger Stone to get advance notice of the additional hack and leak of what ends up being the John Podesta files, right? August 2nd, 2016, Konstantin Kilimnik flies to New York.
I just can't emphasize enough how stunning this would have been if we had learned it during the campaign. The notion that Paul Manafort left Trump Tower to go meet with a guy who had ties to Russian intelligence and talk about the presidential campaign. I mean, their heads would have exploded if we had learned this in August 2016. And, the passage of time doesn't really make it any less stunning.
They meet in a cigar bar owned by Jared Kushner, and they discuss three things. One, Paul Manafort explains how he plans to win. He explains that they're going to win in the Rust Belt. They're going to win in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, where they did end up winning, and he also names Minnesota. They didn't end up winning there, but they came pretty close. So in other words, Manafort says this is how we're going to win. So they get the campaign strategy. They also talk about how to get paid. So this involves both, how do I get the Ukrainian oligarchs who used to pay me millions of dollars, how do I get them to pay me, I think it was $1.4 million that I need immediately because I'm badly underwater, I'm badly in debt. And how do I make good on the debt I owe to Oleg Deripaska? How do I get that forgiven? How am I going to win the campaign? How do I make $20 million? Or basically, how do I make a deal worth $20 million? And finally, Kilimnik pitches Manafort on a plan to carve up Ukraine.
You say that Gates gave Kilimnik internal polling in 2016 on battleground states. I mean, that an American Trump campaign official gave it to a Russian Ukrainian official. What do you think that was all about? What for?
So in addition to that, Christian, that was repeatedly given. And in the middle of the summer of that campaign, August 2nd of 2016, Konstantin Kilimnik flew from Moscow to meet with Paul Manafort. And one of the things that we were able to piece together in a recount is Kilimnik comes and asks Paul Manafort to get Trump's commitment when he becomes president to allow Russia to take over half of Ukraine.
Manafort, when allegedly cooperating with Mueller, claimed that he never entertained, that he recognized that would amount to carving up Ukraine. He recognized that would amount to basically giving Russia Ukraine. But the deal, nevertheless, those discussions about how to carve up Ukraine continued at least until 2018. In that meeting, you have the outlines. Again, Manafort says he didn't bite, but you have the outlines of a quid pro quo. You have Manafort giving Russia what it needs to optimize their interference in the election. They know now what Manafort wants to accomplish. And by the way, in September of 2016, Russia, this is a part of the hack that people don't understand. Russia hacked Hillary's analytics. They went into AWS, where Hillary was doing the data analysis on how to optimize her own campaign. And they took snapshots of her kind of test model for how she was going to win the campaign. So in August of 2016, Russia learns how Trump wants to win the campaign. In September of 2016, Russia, through these hacks, learns how Hillary wants to win the campaign. We don't know what happened with that, but we know that by September of 2016, Russia has both sides of that equation. August 2nd meeting. How do I get paid? How do I enter into a $20 million deal?
And he says to Klimnik, how do we use this to get whole? He means financially whole. How do we use this job I've got and this positive press I'm getting with the Trump campaign to make money?
Both through debt relief and through payments from the Ukrainian oligarchs. How do I help Russia optimize their interference efforts? Again, Manafort says he wasn't a part of that. He says that he didn't know about it. But in any case, he gives them information that is very useful to that. And finally, let's carve up Ukraine. That's the outlines of the quid pro quo that happens on August 2nd, 2016. Manafort says he didn't enter into one. And that is one of the two very damning aspects of Trump people's involvement in Russia's interference campaign, with the other being Roger Stone. And the important thing to remember, the important takeaway from this is, one, there were the two prongs of Russia's interference, the social media campaign, the hack and leak campaign. Two, that took place against the background of efforts to at least cultivate and in some cases recruit people on the left, people in the middle, but especially people all around Trump. One of the things Russia was trying to do was, if Trump won, ensure that there were people inside the White House that were feeding back to Russia. And already that recruitment effort, the hack and leak campaign and the social media campaign, made that recruitment effort, made those who had been cultivated more exposed, compromised, not because they had agreed to work with Russia, but because the fact that they had entertained Russian discussions already looked bad. That's all it took. It looked bad. Now they had something to hide, whether or not there was something substantive to hide. And then finally, as I said, there were the two opportunistic attacks, NSA, CIA, and that raised the stakes on those people like Roger Stone who really were chasing the Russian hack and leak campaign. As we'll discuss in the upcoming episodes, on top of that, Russia, with the dossier, made an absolute opportunistic attack on the FBI to discredit the FBI. So the way I think of the Russian attack in 2016 is, you've got the kind of cultivation that always goes on. You've got two campaigns, the social media campaign and the hack and leak campaign, that make the normal cultivation more costly, more compromising. And then you've got these attacks, first NSA, then CIA, and ultimately FBI. You've got these attacks on the deep state, which ends up not so much getting Trump elected. I think we can explain Trump's election to Jim Comey, for example, but ends up making the investigation into the Russian attack far more polarizing than it necessarily would. And that, in turn, makes the attack on the FBI far more effective than it would otherwise have been.
Thanks for listening to Ball of Thread. Expect a new episode about every 2 weeks until the election. To support this series and get answers to your questions with a bonus Q&A podcast, go to patreon.com/balloffthread. You can join us for as little as $1 a month. We appreciate your sharing this work with anyone who cares about the Constitution, and please consider giving us a 5-star rating wherever you get your podcasts.